It's funny how sometimes the smallest, most overlooked details can hide the most profound truths. And today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating puzzle, one that's tucked away inside one of the most famous stories ever told, the night Peter denied Jesus. It's a story about failure and foresight and a rooster.
So let's get right to it. Could a simple rooster really throw a wrench into one of history's most famous stories? I mean, for centuries, people reading the Gospels have noticed this subtle difference in the accounts of that night. It all comes down to when and how many times that rooster crowed. And yeah, it might seem like a tiny, insignificant thing, but trust me, it opens up a doorway to a much, much deeper story about history, about language, and really about the human heart.
All right, so let's set the scene. We're on the Mount of Olives. You can just imagine the mood. It's heavy, right? Jesus has just had his last supper with his disciples, and then he turns and makes this absolutely startling prediction. And he aims it right at his most confident, most outspoken disciple, Peter. And here it is. This is the heart of the whole puzzle, right here, side by side. If you look at Matthew's Gospel, and Luke's and John's are the same on this, the prediction is really clear. Peter, you'll deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. Simple enough. But then you get to Mark's Gospel, and he adds one single crucial word, twice. Before the rooster crows twice. Now that might not sound like a big deal, but it's not just a small variation. It totally changes the timeline of what's about to happen.
So you see, the issue isn't just about counting the crows. It's really about the timing. Because in Mark's version of the story, a rooster actually crows after Peter's very first denial. And that seems to fly right in the face of the other Gospels, where the impression is that everything, all 3 denials, happens before you hear any rooster at all.
Okay, so this chart really breaks it down for us. Look at Matthew. Super straightforward. 3 denials happen, then a rooster crows. Boom. But Mark's account, it's more like a little 2-act drama. You get 1 denial, then a crow, then 2 more denials, and a second crow. So what's interesting is that each gospel story perfectly fulfills its own prediction. But when you put them together, well, it looks like we've got a real, genuine contradiction on our hands.
So, where do we go from here? How do we even begin to untangle this? Well, the first logical step is to go straight to the source. We're going to have to put on our detective hats for a minute and look at the ancient manuscripts themselves. Could this all just be a simple copying mistake?
And really, this is the very first question any historian or scholar would ask. You have to remember, these texts were copied by hand over and over again for centuries. It was just normal for small changes, whether they were accidental slips of the pen or even intentional tweaks, to creep into the text. So the big question is, could that word twice be something a later scribe added in? Maybe to add a little flair, but without realizing they were creating a major headache for future readers.
And at first glance, it looks like we might have our answer. Some of the oldest, most important manuscripts of Mark's Gospel, they don't have the word twice. So case closed, right? Well, not so fast. This is where things get really interesting. Most scholars use a principle they call the harder reading. And the logic goes like this. Think about it from the scribe's point of view. If you're trying to make all the Gospels line up and harmonize, are you more likely to add a word that creates a problem or remove a confusing word to make things match? Yeah, you'd probably remove it. So what that means is that tricky word, twice, was most likely there in Mark's original version. And just like that, the mystery gets even deeper.
All right, so if a copyist's error isn't the solution, maybe we've been looking in the wrong place. Maybe the clue isn't in the text itself, but in the world behind the text. What if the whole puzzle isn't about counting how many times a bird made a noise, but about what the word cockcrow actually meant to the people living in Jerusalem back then?
I mean, when I say cockcrow, we all picture the same thing, don't we? A rooster, probably sitting on a fence post, letting everyone know the sun is coming up. That's the literal common sense image. And it's how people have read this story for basically 2,000 years.
But what if that's not what it meant back then? This is the real pivot point of our investigation. What if in first century Jerusalem, cockcrow didn't mean a literal bird? What if it was more like slang or a technical term? An idiom that everybody at the time would have instantly understood, but that we've kind of lost the meaning of over the centuries.
Well, it turns out there are 2 major historical clues that point exactly in that direction, and they come from 2 very different sources, one from the Roman army that was occupying the city, and the other from the very heart of Jewish religious life, the temple. So let's start with the Romans. Their military divided the night into 4 shifts, or watches, and the third one, which ran from about midnight to 3 a.m., had an official Latin name, the Gallicinium. And you know what that means? The cockcrow. And at the end of this watch, a bugle would sound. So if you were living in Jerusalem, a city crawling with Roman soldiers, the cockcrow wasn't just some random animal sound. It was an official, predictable, city-wide time signal.
But hold on, it wasn't just a Roman thing. The temple, the center of Jewish life, had its own cockcrow too. The priests had a whole series of rituals and sacrifices they had to perform before dawn, and they needed a precise signal to know when to get started in the dark.
And we actually have solid evidence for this. It comes from the Mishna, which is this ancient collection of Jewish oral traditions and laws. And it says, right there in black and white, that certain temple duties began at cockcrow. Some historians even think this was marked by a priest blowing a shofar, a trumpet, from the temple walls. So now think about this. We have 2 potential, official, man-made signals, both called the cockcrow, echoing through the city at night.
Okay, but this next clue, this is the real kicker. The same ancient Jewish text, the Mishna, also states that it was forbidden to raise chickens inside the holy city of Jerusalem. They were seen as unclean animals, and their scratching could turn up impure things. Now sure, maybe a traveler could have snuck one in, but the idea of a rooster just hanging out and crowing reliably right there in the high priest's courtyard, it's pretty unlikely from a historical standpoint. So when you put it all together, the cockcrow was almost certainly a well-known, man-made signal, a bugle call or a trumpet blast that everyone in the city would have recognized.
So there we have it. The historical puzzle, it seems to be solved. But you know, that's really only half the story. Because the real genius of Mark's version isn't just that it might be more historically precise. It's the incredible human drama that it creates. So let's shift gears now, away from the technical details and into the heart of the story. This new understanding just reframes everything. Suddenly, Mark's version doesn't look like a mistake anymore. It looks like a masterpiece of storytelling. That first signal, that first cockcrow that sounds after the first denial, it's not just a random detail. It's a moment of grace. It's a wake-up call. It's like a divine alarm bell ringing just for Peter, an alarm that he tragically, completely ignores.
Let's just walk through it step by step. Peter makes that first denial, maybe out of pure panic. Then the signal sounds. The Roman bugle or the temple shofar, it doesn't matter. He hears it. And in that moment, he has a choice. He could stop. He could remember what Jesus told him, but he doesn't. Instead, he doubles down. He starts cursing and swearing to push people away. And then the final signal sounds. And in that moment, the full weight of his failure just comes crashing down on him. That first warning, the one he ignored, just makes the whole thing so much more heartbreaking.
And you know, in the end, it doesn't matter which gospel you're reading. They all arrive at this exact same devastating place. That sound, whether it was a real bird or a military bugle, it just shatters Peter's bravado, his self-confidence, and it leaves him completely alone with the raw, painful truth of what he's just done.
But Peter's story doesn't end there, with him weeping in the dark. In one of those beautiful ironies you sometimes find in history, this symbol of his absolute worst moment, this rooster, it gets transformed. It stops being a symbol of betrayal and failure, and it becomes something else entirely, an emblem of hope and redemption. So over time, the rooster took on all these new, powerful meanings. It became a symbol of vigilance, right? A call to stay spiritually awake and aware. It also became a symbol of repentance because Peter's failure wasn't the end of his story. He was forgiven and restored. It also came to represent the new dawn of the resurrection, the light after the darkness. And this symbolism became so powerful that, way back in the 9th century, a pope actually decreed that a rooster should be placed on top of every church steeple, and you still see them there today spinning in the wind, a constant reminder of this whole story. And this wasn't a late idea either. You can find Christian poets, like this one, Prudentius, writing about it way back in the 4th century. He was already talking about the rooster in this new way, not as a reminder of denial, but as the winged herald of the day. It became this beautiful, poetic image for Jesus himself, the one who calls us out of darkness and into a new life. So here we are, back where we started, but looking at everything a little differently now. What seemed like just a pesky contradiction in a book turned out to be a doorway. It was a doorway into the world of Roman military schedules and ancient Jewish purity laws, which is cool in itself. But more than that, it opened up a much deeper story. A story about how fragile we can be, and about a kind of grace that can take our most bitter failures and somehow, incredibly, transform them into symbols of hope.